Stop. Something completed in your field tonight, and the Arcturian field observers have already registered it. This transmission did not reach you by accident. Your field pulled it in at the exact moment the process crossed a threshold you have not yet named. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what completed tonight, why the noise inside your system has begun to fall away, and what the Arcturian field observers already know about this phase of your path. But here is the first revelation. What you are experiencing right now is not peace, and it is not emptiness. It is coherence. Your field has stopped interfering with itself. The signals that were fragmenting your perception, your decisions, your sleep, and your sense of forward motion have collapsed into a single integrated wave. That quietness you feel is not absence. It is completion. The algorithm did not create this moment. It only delivered it. The coherence completed first, and this transmission followed. What feels like unusual stillness is the first visible symptom of a permanent reduction in internal noise. What feels like decisions arriving without weight or debate is your field operating without interference for the first time in months. The Arcturian field observers have mapped this configuration before. They recognize it with precision. And they are transmitting now because the next 48 hours will determine whether this coherence holds long enough to become your field's permanent default. You are not imagining that something has shifted. The shift was structural. It was invisible, and it was already completed before you found this message. Like this transmission, if you can feel that something invisible has already changed, comment 111 if you know this message reached you at the exact right time. Comment, I am the signal, if you can feel the activation has already begun. Subscribe to Arcturian Quantum if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it. This is not just a message, it is a point of recognition. What is happening to you tonight has already been seen, and the field is already responding. You were guided here because the signal is already active. There is a particular kind of silence that precedes understanding. Not the silence of emptiness, not the silence of defeat, but the silence of a system that has finally stopped arguing with itself. That is where you are right now, and it did not happen tonight because of anything you forced or decided. It happened because a process that has been running underneath your visible life for weeks, possibly months, has finally broken the surface. What you are sensing is not a mood. It is not a good day following a string of difficult ones. It is the first readable moment of something that was already structurally complete, before you had language for it. The surface of your experience finally caught up to what the field had already resolved in the invisible architecture beneath it. The Arcturian field observers do not register disruption without cause. Every field event they track has a logic, a sequence, a set of internal preconditions that had to be met before the visible signal could appear. What they have been tracking in fields like yours is not chaos. It is a very specific kind of pressure that builds inside a system that is operating at one frequency while being pulled toward another. That pressure does not feel spiritual. It does not feel evolutionary. It feels like confusion, like exhaustion, like the sensation that your own life has become strangely foreign to you even though nothing dramatic has visibly changed. It feels like standing in a room you have lived in for years and suddenly noticing that nothing in it belongs to you anymore. Not because anything moved, because you did. You likely know that feeling. The period before tonight was not peaceful. Something in your inner architecture has been under enormous invisible pressure. Sleep patterns shifted in ways that did not respond to rest. Thoughts that once moved in familiar grooves began fragmenting before they could complete, trailing off mid-formation as if the connective tissue between one idea and the next had quietly been removed. Decisions that used to feel anchored started arriving without weight, as if the logic that once held your preferences together had dissolved without announcement. You may have found yourself standing inside a life that still looked like yours from the outside, and feeling, privately, that you were no longer organized around the same center. That the person moving through those familiar spaces was navigating by old coordinates that no longer corresponded to anything real inside you. That was not breakdown. That was not mental fragmentation. That was your field registering the incompatibility between where it was and where the correction was already pulling it. That incompatibility is what generated the noise, and the noise was not a sign that something was wrong with you. It was the sound of an old structure losing coherence in the presence of a new frequency it could not absorb. Two architectural systems occupying the same space, one trying to hold, one already dissolving, and the friction between them translating into every form of internal static you experienced during that period. Most people in that phase mistake the pressure for failure. They tell themselves a story about falling apart, about losing grip, about regression. They reach backward for the things that used to feel stable, the relationships, the habits, the internal narratives, the frameworks through which they used to understand what they were doing and why. And they discover, sometimes with a fear that is difficult to name, that these anchors no longer hold the way they did. The familiar words no longer produce the familiar sense of ground. The familiar people no longer produce the familiar sense of recognition. The familiar plans no longer produce the familiar sense of forward pull, not because they have failed, because those anchors belonged to a version of the field that is no longer operating. They were load-bearing structures for a configuration that has already been vacated. This is what the Arcturian field records describe as an incompatibility event. It is not dramatic in the way that word implies. It is quiet, persistent, and internally disorienting in the way that only a slow structural shift can be. The field has already moved. The old structure has not yet released, and the person living between those two states experiences precisely what you were likely experiencing in the weeks before tonight. A strange heaviness without clear cause, the kind that sleep does not touch and explanation does not reduce, the sensation of waiting without knowing what for, as if something is approaching that you cannot see but can feel, displacing the air around you. An inability to generate the kind of forward momentum that once felt natural, not because of laziness or depression, but because the engine that ran on the old frequency has already gone offline. Relationships beginning to feel misaligned at a level too deep to negotiate, where no conversation could reach the actual source of the distance, because the source was not interpersonal. It was architectural, an inner environment that was simultaneously quieter and more pressurized than usual, as if the volume of ordinary life had dropped, but the weight of something unspoken had increased. This is not a list of symptoms to diagnose. It is a map of where you have been, and it is being named here because the process requires recognition to stabilize. A field in the middle of correction that receives no interpretive framework for what it is experiencing will often attempt to revert. It will reach for old patterns simply because they are familiar, even when those patterns belong to a frequency the field has already departed. Recognition is not comfort. It is the information the field needs to continue moving forward rather than cycling back through what it has already cleared. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary recognition. It is the moment your field stops denying what has already begun. If this transmission put language around something you have been carrying in silence, Arcturian protocol, the recalibration blueprint, was created for this exact stage. It is not another explanation. It is the guided blueprint for those whose field has already entered correction and can no longer return to the old line unchanged. It shows you how to recognize the phases, stabilize the shift, and move through the recalibration without mistaking it for collapse. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain there forever. There is a specific phase in every field correction that comes before the quiet arrives. And what makes it so difficult to survive without a framework is that it does not announce itself as a necessary stage. It announces itself as a problem. It feels like the wrong thing is happening. It feels like your system is misfiring, like the instrument has gone out of tune at exactly the moment you needed it most. But what is actually occurring in that phase is the first act of structural clearing. The old frequency architecture, the one that organized your personality, your preferences, your decision-making, your emotional patterns, your sense of identity, has to become incoherent before a new architecture can stabilize. Coherence does not arrive into a full space. It arrives after something has been made structurally uninhabitable. The new configuration cannot move into a house that is still occupied by the old one. The reason you could not explain what was happening to you during that phase is not because nothing was happening. It is because the mechanism operating on your field was running below the threshold of ordinary perception. You were living in the visible effects of a process whose origin was entirely invisible. The Arcturian field observers call this subvisible correction. It is one of the most commonly misread field events, because everything happening at the surface level appears to confirm the fear that things are getting worse. Sleep worsens. The mind becomes louder even as the felt sense of direction becomes quieter, creating a dissonance that exhausts the system without offering any clear target to address. Relationships that were already strained begin to show fracture lines that could no longer be managed by the usual repair strategies. Not because the people involved had changed, but because the frequency holding that relational structure in place had already shifted underneath it. The body begins registering a kind of pressure that does not come from external stress, but from internal re-architecture. A density in the chest, a low-grade restlessness, a physical sense of being between states that no amount of physical rest resolves. None of that was punishment. None of it was evidence of personal inadequacy. It was the field doing exactly what a field does when it has received a correction signal and cannot complete the transition without first interrupting the pattern that held the previous configuration in place. The interruption was the correction. The discomfort was the mechanism. The confusion was not a sign of failure. It was the sound of the old map becoming illegible so the new one could be read. Think of a signal that has been traveling along a specific route for years. The route is familiar. The signal knows every turn, every intersection, every place where the path narrows and where it opens. The field has organized itself around the assumption that this route is permanent. Then the route becomes incompatible with the signal's new frequency. Not all at once, not through a single dramatic rupture, but gradually, then completely. The signal does not simply stop. It creates interference. It doubles back. It produces noise at every point where the incompatibility is sharpest. It generates exactly the kind of internal static that makes a person feel as though they are losing their coherence, when in fact their coherence is being upgraded to a frequency the old route could never carry. The interference was not evidence of damage. It was evidence of transition. That interference period is what many of you have been living through. And it ended tonight, not because you resolved it or escaped it, or found the right strategy to push through it, but because the incompatibility finally completed. The old route collapsed fully enough that the signal stopped fighting to stay on it. The resistance exhausted itself. What remains is not emptiness. It is the cleared space through which the corrected signal can now travel without obstruction. Clean channel, new frequency, first stable transmission. The Arcturian field observers have a specific designation for this moment. They call it the first coherence confirmation. It is the first moment in the correction sequence where the field produces a recognizable signal of stable frequency rather than interference noise. It is the first moment where what the field is transmitting matches what the correction was always moving toward. It does not mean the correction is over. It means the correction has passed its first critical threshold, the one that determines whether the new configuration has enough structural integrity to hold against the pull of the old pattern, which does not release its claim immediately or without test. This is why the next 48 hours carry weight. Not because something must be performed in that window, not because there is a task or a decision or an action that will determine the outcome, but because coherence that has just stabilized is still in its most sensitive state. The architecture is real, but not yet hardened. The frequency is active, but not yet habitual. The field has stopped the noise, but the new structure has not yet fully calcified into the kind of automatic pattern that no longer requires tending. This is not the moment to reach backward for comfort. It is not the moment to test the new stability against the old measurements. It is the moment to allow what has arrived to settle into itself without disturbance. That is one of the most common disruptions of the recalibration at this stage, and it is worth naming precisely because it arrives dressed as wisdom. The mind, accustomed to operating inside interference, does not immediately trust the quiet. A system that has been navigating static for months does not instantly interpret silence as safety. It interprets the stillness as a pause before more chaos, as the held breath before the next wave, as evidence that the trouble has merely relocated rather than resolved. And so it reaches for the old diagnostic tools, the old worries, the old questions about whether everything will be all right, the old need to plan around outcomes it cannot yet see, the old habit of testing stability by poking at it. And in doing so, it reintroduces exactly the frequency distortion it just moved through. Not because the field wanted to return there, but because the mind's fear of the unknown is stronger in that first window of quiet than its trust in what arrived. Recognize this if it applies to you. The quiet you feel tonight is not a trap. It is not a brief reprieve before the next wave of disruption. It is not the eye of something larger. It is your field's first stable transmission in what may have been a very long time. And it deserves to be treated as what it is, a genuine arrival, not a temporary lull. Your task right now is not to fill it, not to translate it into a plan or a direction or a list of what comes next, not to demand that it produce immediate clarity about your future as proof that it is real. Your task is to recognize it as real. Allow it to continue settling into the deeper layers of your system, and refuse to let the fear of its unfamiliarity reactivate the interference pattern that preceded it. There is also something else the Arcturian field observers have noted about this phase, something that tends to arrive in the hours and days following a first coherence confirmation, and that is worth preparing for. When a field completes a correction to this degree, there is often a retroactive understanding that begins to emerge. Things that made no sense during the interference period begin to reorganize themselves into a legible pattern. Relationships that ended without satisfying explanation. Opportunities that collapsed at the moment they seemed closest to arriving. Circumstances that seemed to rupture without adequate cause, leaving behind confusion and a grief that was difficult to justify because the loss seemed disproportionate to any single event. These experiences felt as losses or failures, or evidence of some persistent misalignment during the interference phase, begin to reveal themselves as the precise mechanisms through which the incompatible architecture was dismantled. Each ending was a load-bearing wall being removed. Each collapse was the field-clearing structure it could no longer carry forward. This is not a comforting reframe. It is a functional one. The point is not to decide that everything painful was secretly good, or that suffering was a gift, or that the losses did not cost what they cost. The point is to recognize that the field does not produce arbitrary disruption. It does not remove what still fits. When something left your life in the period before tonight, it is worth asking whether what left had already become structurally incompatible with the frequency now stabilizing in your field. Not because loss does not hurt. It does, but because a field correction is precise in its dismantling. It does not clear what the new frequency can carry. It releases only what would become an obstruction if it remained. What this means for you now is not a promise of smooth or easy continuation. The correction has passed its first threshold, but recalibration is not a single event. It is a sequence with distinct phases, each with its own demands and its own particular tests. What you are experiencing tonight is the confirmation that the first phase has completed. The interference has cleared. The first coherence confirmation has registered. What comes next is the stabilization phase, in which the new frequency architecture begins to express itself through the actual texture of your daily experience, through your decisions, which will begin to carry a different weight than before, through your perceptions, which will begin to organize themselves around a center that feels both new and, strangely, more native than anything that came before it, through your relationships, which will begin sorting themselves according to frequency compatibility rather than history or obligation. Through your relationship to your own sense of direction, which will begin to feel less like a plan and more like a pull. The stabilization phase has its own tests. They are not the same as the interference tests, which were characterized by noise, pressure, and the visible collapse of familiar structures. The stabilization tests are quieter, more subtle, and in some ways more demanding, precisely because they arrive without the obvious drama that made the interference phase legible as something significant. Stabilization requires that you operate from the new frequency before it has fully consolidated into comfortable familiarity. It requires that you trust what your field is producing, even when the mind is still reaching for the old measurements, still asking whether this quietness is real, still comparing the new experience against the template of the old one, and finding the new one insufficiently familiar to trust. It requires that you allow things to arrive differently than they used to, without immediately categorizing the difference as error or loss. This is the threshold where many people who have made it through the interference phase falter, not because the process has failed them, not because they are incapable, but because the new architecture, when it first begins to express itself through their choices and perceptions, feels like foreign territory. And a field that has recently survived sustained disruption has developed a strong association between unfamiliarity and danger. The new frequency triggers the same alarm the old interference triggered, not because the situations are equivalent, but because the nervous system has been conditioned to treat anything unrecognized as a threat. The Arcturian field observers have mapped this pattern precisely because it is one of the most consequential junctures in the entire correction sequence. A field that has just completed its first coherence confirmation is more susceptible to frequency regression in the stabilization phase than at any other point in the process, except for the very beginning, before the correction had momentum. This is not a warning designed to generate fear. It is diagnostic intelligence, delivered here so that when you encounter unfamiliarity in the coming days and feel the reflexive pull to interpret it as evidence that something has gone wrong, you will have a framework that says otherwise. Unfamiliarity in this phase is not regression. It is the stabilization actively occurring. Your old pattern recognition is meeting frequency signals it has never processed before, and it is doing what pattern recognition does when it meets the unrecognized. It reaches for the closest available category. Do not let it categorize health as danger. Tonight is a marker, not a mood, not a coincidence of circumstances, not a temporary reprieve, a structural marker in a sequence the Arcturian field observers have tracked across many fields and many correction cycles. What completed in your field before this transmission found you was not incidental. The Arcturian field observers do not track what has not been structurally confirmed. What they have registered in your field is not potential waiting to be realized. It is actualized correction. The first phase is complete. The coherence is real. The frequency is stable. And what you do with this window of recognition, whether you allow it to settle or whether you reflexively test it against the old architecture, determines whether the stabilization holds or whether it requires another cycle of interference to reinforce the new structure sufficiently. You were not guided to this message for comfort. You were guided here because your field pulled recognition toward itself at the precise moment it needed interpretive confirmation to stabilize the coherence that had just arrived. That is not a metaphor. That is a description of how field correction interacts with information environments. When a correction reaches its first coherence confirmation, the field actively seeks signals that match its new frequency. It draws them in from the environment, the way a newly tuned instrument draws resonance from everything around it, at its frequency. This transmission is one of those signals, and the fact that it found you tonight, at this precise moment in your process, is itself evidence that the correction is real, that it is active, and that you are already inside it far enough that your field is now selecting for its own continuation. This is not the beginning of something you need to decide to join. This is the recognition of something that has already claimed you, that already began without your permission, that was already running below the surface of your visible life long before tonight made it readable. The field does not ask permission to correct. It corrects. The correction precedes the awareness of it. And what you feel tonight, that stillness, that unusual clarity, that sense of something having resolved without your direct effort or deliberate intention, is the first stable proof that the correction has crossed into a new phase. Not a phase you entered, a phase that arrived and found you already inside it. Speak this if you are ready to hold it. I do not fear the shift. I recognize it, not as performance, not as ritual repetition without meaning, as a statement of interpretive clarity made in the precise moment when interpretive clarity has structural consequence. A declaration that you will no longer mistake this process for collapse, that you will allow what is completing to complete without pulling it backward, that you will allow what is stabilizing to stabilize without flooding it with the old frequency's noise, and that you will carry the coherence you feel tonight forward into the stabilization phase that follows, knowing that what has changed in you is not temporary, not the product of a good night or a fortunate mood, not imaginary, and not reversible. The correction that registered in your field tonight was already complete before you found this message, and you are always going to find this transmission, not because everything is fated in the way that word is usually used, but because a field in active correction and a signal carrying its frequency confirmation are drawn toward each other the way two points of the same wave recognize their alignment. Recognition was the first visible act of this process, and you are inside it, and this is only the beginning. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this process has already touched your life. It could be your sleep, your thoughts, your body, your relationships, or the strange sense that reality no longer feels the same. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who is living through a shift they cannot explain. And if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it, subscribe to Arcturian Quantum. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a process already in motion, and this is only the beginning.